has to do with the form of theophany in each of those epochs of redemptive history. And the point we then make is that in the patriarchal period, the divine manifestation is in terms of the angel. And there are statements that seem to sum up the totality of divine self-manifestation during the patriarchal period in terms of the angel. And but the angel as a figure that you could hardly distinguish when you confronted him or he confronted you from other human beings, and the episode of the Malach Yahweh and the other angels coming to Abraham and Sarah and their tent and so on would illustrate that. But over against this kind of manifestation of the Malach Yahweh by himself, and apart from glorious manifestations, we have then in the Mosaic period the association that we've been speaking about here, beginning right there at the Exodus passage we read about, the close association of the Malach with the Kavod. And this is a new stage, we argue, in redemptive history. Up until the Mosaic economy, it's kingdom prologue. You haven't come to the parousia day of the Old Testament. With Moses, you have the typological parousia judgment day event, the coming of the kingdom now. It's no longer kingdom prologue, it's now kingdom come in terms of the typological kingdom. And appropriate to the coming of the kingdom is the glory. It's a kingdom of power and glory. It's one, therefore, in which God's glory will be revealed, not as it is yet in heaven, but at least as it is projected and incorporated and embodied in the glory spirit phenomenon. And it is this phenomena then that the Malach Yahweh is associated from the point of the Exodus on. Then the troubles start, and Israel breaks covenant, and they become subject to the threatened curses of the covenant, and even with the rupture of the whole covenant bond. And so now we get God threatening that this close association of angel and glory spirit is going to cease, and that as Israel proceeds on its way in the future up to the land of Canaan, which they will still be doing, it will be without the divine presence. My angel will lead you, but I will not go with you. And in that language, we have God identifying himself peculiarly with the glory spirit. That is what he means. I will not go with you. That is my panim, my glory is not to go with you, but the angel. We're going to go back to patriarchal days again, before the coming of the kingdom, before the parousia. We're going back to kingdom prologue again in my relationship to you. That's what God threatens, and there would be not the fulfilling of the kingdom promise. And Moses doesn't want eschatology to move backwards here. The parousia, the kingdom day has come, and all the nations have seen that God has come in this peculiar way, and why should it be reversed to the days of kingdom? And so he prays that this might be reversed, and that God would send before them not only the angel, but that he would send as well that God's own presence, the glory spirit. And the Lord does accede to that request, and yet with some qualifications, as we'll see. Well, that's what I'm trying to get at here on pages 71 and following. Speaking of this relationship between the angel and the glory spirit, the subtleties of this mysterious relationship have perplexed the exegesis, especially of Exodus 32 and 33. Some commentators feel that the difficulties encountered in these chapters compel the assumption that the present narrative combines sources which were not in agreement on their theology of the divine presence in Israel. It will be found, I believe, that a satisfactory solution depends on our recognizing that the negotiations of the Lord and Moses turn on the distinction between the angel and the presence. My angel will go before you, my presence, my glory spirit presence will not. In response to the intercession of Moses on this occasion, the Lord promised to send the angel, my angel, Exodus 32:34, before Israel to drive out the occupants of the promised land. And in contrast to the promise of the availability of the angel was the Lord's declaration, I will not go up. The angel will go up. I will not go up in your midst. However, relenting at Moses' plea that the divine splendor, the divine majesty, the way he describes the glory cloud, should go with them, relenting, the Lord promised, my presence will go with you, all right? So not just the angel, but the glory spirit will go as well. And this prompted Moses to express the desire to proceed no farther unless the Lord's presence did indeed accompany him and the people. For it was in God's going with them in the form of this glory angel that God's election of Israel would be known. Moreover, as a seal of God's assurance that he would do this, Moses requested a revelation of that glory promptly, and there is such. Now, the issue concerned two modes of divine manifestation. One that had been characteristic of the patriarchal age, as I just tried to explain, and one that signalized the new Mosaic age of the fulfillment of the promises. And as we said, that was Moses' concern, that they shouldn't be eschatologically moving backwards. He wants the two to go together. The basic issue then in Exodus 32 and 33 negotiations was whether the glory presence of God, the Shekinah cloud, clearly visible to all far and wide, would continue with Israel, or whether they would return to this more private mode of theophany in the form of intermittent appearances of the angel apart from the glory. That was the issue. And what Moses desired was the clearest possible assurance of the restoration of the covenantal favor that had been forfeited, and his concern was to secure certification also of his own mediatorial vocation before the eyes of Israel, and the attestation of Israel's election as God's kingdom people before the eyes of the Egyptians and the rest of the nations. Now, only a manifestation of God's presence with the awesome public visibility of the glory cloud could accomplish all of these ends. Since the fame of the spectacular divine presence in Israel's midst had already spread among the surrounding nations, it would be particularly difficult to convince them of Israel's status as God's protectorate if the famous glory theophany were now withdrawn from them. So the point of Moses' intercession hinges on the distinction between angel theophany and presence face theophany, or better, between glory angel theophany and angel theophany apart from the glory face. So that was one issue, and it is settled in terms of God's merciful response. Okay, the glory cloud will go with you. But now God foresees that there is a danger. Yes, he grants the prayer, he grants his presence, but the Lord sees what the danger will be. He knows the sinful heart of the people, and he knows that the presence of his own glory right in the midst of them will therefore constitute a threat to them. He is a consuming fire, and if in such close contact with him sin breaks out among the people, there will be an immediate and direct impact of his consuming, judging fire upon them, and they will be destroyed. And therefore, to ward off that particular peril while granting that his presence would be with them, the Lord institutes another feature, namely that he will not be located right in the midst of the camp anymore, but he will be located outside the camp. His sanctuary, his throne, his palace presence will not be in the center of the tribes, as it's described that they are to be located, all around the central sanctuary, but rather to decrease the imminence of the peril to Israel. He will be situated in a camp, in a tent outside the camp. And so the text tells us then that Moses, complying with that, did set up the tent outside the camp. Now, one of those problems of the historiographical technique of dischronologized narratives faces us here. And as this issue is being dealt with in Exodus 32 and 33, it does move on to the business I just talked about the tent and so on. But as a study of the relevant issues indicates, here the text, having started to deal with this theme of God's presence in the midst of Israel, continues it at a point chronologically later on before it continues with the theme of Moses back there at Sinai in the book of Exodus. And not recognizing that the narrative there in Exodus 32 or 33 about the tent being set up outside the camp, not recognizing that that is a chronologically dislocated thing that belongs to a year later, then people are stuck conjecturing, what is this tent? What tent did Moses put out? Because, of course, at that juncture, at Exodus 32 and 33, there was no tent yet. There was no tabernacle of God. That's not set up until you come to the end of the book of Exodus, and it's anointed by Moses and so on, Exodus 40. And so one has to conjecture, the same as in Numbers 12, where we saw was also part of this dischronologized narrative. People are wondering, who is this Cushite woman that is spoken of, against whom Miriam and Aaron are complaining? And the answer there we found, which is dealing with that period a year later, the answer to that question is found in recognizing that back in Exodus 18 we have another bit of dischronologized narrative, and there in Exodus 18 we are reading about Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, and Zipporah, his wife, and Exodus 18 actually belongs there with Numbers 10, 11, and 12 we found, and so this Cushite woman is Zipporah. You don't have to find another wife of Moses, and so in this situation you don't have to find another sanctuary of Moses or something. There's only the one sanctuary, and this episode then is referring to that situation after they were on the march and after they were already showing their rebelliousness against the Lord once again. Well, so that's part of this sort of exegetically difficult context that we have to work our way through in order to understand the relationship between the Malach Yahweh and the angel of the Lord. So normative for the theocratic period would be the close association of these two, not the angel by himself, but the angel is closely associated with the glory manifestation. Well, now this angel then is divine. He has a peculiarly intimate relationship to the glory spirit. And our particular thesis, however, is that he functions as a prophet. On page 75, then in the Images of the Spirit, we have that heading, the angel as a prophet. As one, as one then, whom, as we've seen, was integral to the glory from the beginning. The angel is the angel of the Panim. The angel is associated with that glory reality of God's temple and presence. And what the other prophets then were raptured up into, and not part of their previous experience, this is the native habitat of the Malach Yahweh, to be right there in that glory council of God above. The angel of the presence enjoyed that as an original prerogative, that standing in the heavenly council which was prerequisite to true prophethood. And as the divine Malach, messenger or angel, sent forth from the glory council, he was the original of all of the other Navi Malachim figures that we have seen. The prophets, the Nevi'im, were Malachim. They were all angels. This was the original of these other Malachim. He is the original Malach, messenger figure. Like the prophets raised up after the order of Moses, the angel had a covenantal mission. Malachi calls him the angel of the covenant, Malachi 3:1. Yahweh, speaking as Lord of the covenant in the book of the covenant, calls him my angel, Exodus 23:23. The directive given Israel in the Deuteronomic law of the prophet to heed the words of the prophets under threat of the covenant curses was an extension of the orders God had given earlier concerning this archetype angel, namely, again we refer to that verse, Exodus 23:21, namely, obey his voice and provoke him not. Obey his voice and provoke him not. That's God's word to Israel concerning this Malach Yahweh, and applied to the prophets afterwards because they follow in the succession, the likeness of this divine archetype. The authority of the prophets was the delegated divine authority of those who spoke in the name of God. Divine authority was original with the angel prophet because, as we've seen, God's name was actually in him. But perhaps the angel's identity, and now we come to our lawsuit business, perhaps the angel's identity as a prophet figure, as the divine paradigm prophet, of whom the other prophets were human images, comes into sharpest focus in this series of passages in the book of Judges, where the angel is depicted as the Malach, as the messenger of the covenant, engaged in that prophetic function so prominent in the Old Testament, the prosecution of Yahweh's covenant lawsuit against Israel. Let's turn to Judges 2. So we'll be looking at Judges 2 and Judges 6 and Judges 10, and let's make some use of our Hebrew. We've been too far away from Hebrew text being under our nose here. Now, none of these passages was assigned as required reading. In terms of required reading, I think the next one that you should be getting ready, let's see, did I give you Genesis 49? Yeah. Okay, that would be the next one then that Lord willing will be dealing with. And then after that, I guess the Hosea passage. But right now, let's look at Judges. Please find that in your Hebrew text. All right, chapter 2. There it is, the Malach Yahweh, subject of the verb waya'al, Allah, to go up. Now then, the angel of the Lord, the Malach Yahweh, went up from Gilgal el Bochim unto the site called Bochim. In fact, it is in terms of the episode narrated right here that the place took on that name, Bochim, as we'll see. And so he went up to that site and accompanying Israel, as you see, and he said, now here we got a lawsuit speech. And that's one of the things we're interested in, the pattern of the lawsuit speech, which involves, as we said, sort of a going through the original treaty form, but in a new configuration with new application of the different parts of it, but, including right up toward the front then, the historical prologue, the claim of God upon the covenantal obedience in terms of what God has done for them in the past. And here it is. It sounds like the prologue to the Ten Commandments, the preamble to the Ten Commandments, the two tables of the covenant. It begins, Aleph. Now, just grammatically, obviously you need a vav consecutive here because it's referring to what God has done in the past, and this imperfect by itself would suggest it's not referring to the past. So whatever happened with the vav indicator, it's clear that it is referring to the past, and so it's not I will bring you up, but it's I brought you up, and it's not a kal, clearly it's a hifil. So he says, I brought Etchem you up, Mitzrayim, from Egypt. So as we said, it's the same as in the Ten Commandments, the Exodus pointed to as a claim of God on their obedience. I brought you up from Egypt, and now beyond Exodus, we have conquest of the land. The Avi, the field form from Bo, and I brought you El Haaretz unto the land, Asher Nishbati. The verb shava, nifal, means anyone? Swear, huh? So, which I swore to your fathers. So here there's a reference back to the Abrahamic promises. To the land which I swore, la'avotekem, to your fathers. Omer. And I said, now here is what God required. His claim was his redemptive work on their behalf. And then his claim upon them, the covenant stipulations, no, actually it's a further promise. It's a further promise, and it's a further commitment. It's a further indication of God's goodness, which would constitute a further claim on their love and obedience. I said, lo aper, from the verb parer, which means to break, and here God himself is the subject. God committed himself, and I said, I will not break kem the olam. I will never break my covenant with you. I will not break my covenant with you forever. So I put the two negative together. I will never break. So that was the Lord's part. He was committed faithfully to them. And then, as for you, now here are the covenant stipulations in response to my claims. So this is what I expect. And as for you, Tem, lo, and now we get the karat berit idiom, you shall not make a covenant liyoshevei haaretz hazot, with the inhabitants of this land. So your mandate was that of holy war. It was that of cleansing the temple of God that God had staked out for himself, the land of Canaan. It had to be cleansed of the contaminating features that were there, so that God could occupy it as a clean site for his temple. And that meant, therefore, that the Israelites must not make any covenants with the inhabitants of their land and to make peace with them and their idolatrous cult, but they must be at war with and obliterate completely the vestiges and of the Baal cult there. So their altars, Baak would be the singular, here you get the plural, their altars, now from the verb natats, to break down, which I guess we have seen in those Jeremiah passages where Jeremiah's function was to break down and destroy nations as well as to plant them. Well, here, Israel's function then was their altars you shall break down. And now the indictment. Here's where the lawsuit pattern changes the treaty from just being a stipulation into an indictment, because they have violated the stipulations. This is what I required. Lo shematem b'koli, and you did not heed my voice. That's that terminology we found so much in Deuteronomy 30, shama and koli, heeding God's voice. And now the interrogative feature, what is this that you have done? And it has been noted in extra biblical lawsuit material as well, that a characteristic feature is the injection of the interrogative type of thing. What is this now that you have done? Consider your sin. And now you move from the indictment to the threat of judgment. Wagam amarti. And so now, this is what I say. This is what your failure has been, and in spite of my goodness and my commitments. And so now this is what I will do. Lo, I will no longer, the verb garash, drive them out from before you. And instead, they shall be, now this little term, lissidim, is problematic. I'll give you a suggestion as to what it's obvious what it must mean. In fact, the next line is sort of synonymous with it and tells us what's going on. The thought is, they will be to you thorns in your side. And I think the lissidim somehow is a conflated form of words that mean thorns, synonym, and a word that means side. Sod somehow got blended together. And so they shall be to you thorns in your side. And the next clause, as I say, amplifies or repeats it. And their gods will be to you a snare. And the result will be then that Israel will be sinning further and being judged further. Then verse 4, and it was, now there's the lawsuit speech. It's, you might say, first stage lawsuit. It's a call to repentance. It's an offer of restoration, and if they respond properly, and they do. And so verse 4 says, and it came to pass that when the Malach Yahweh, and there he is again, he is the one who's conducting this lawsuit. That's our basic point here. Huh? This is clearly the lawsuit, and many a subsequent passage in the prophets follows this same pattern, but here's the angel of the Lord is conducting the thing, this peculiarly prophetic function. He's the one who's making this speech. And it came to pass then, as the angel of the Lord spoke these words unto all the Bnei Israel, that the people lifted up kolam their voice, and they wept, and they called the name of that place, therefore, Bokim, as we said at the outset. It's named after their weeping on this occasion, and they sacrificed there to the Lord. So there was a happy outcome for this particular lawsuit. And so on pages 75 and 76 then run through that and trace the pattern of the lawsuit if you want to see some other details. Now, the next item then after the Judges 2 episode is in Judges 5, not one of these main lawsuit passages, but just another episode that sort of brings out the reality behind them. In the Song of Deborah, Judges 5, there is a reference to the angel performing a similar function. There is a reference here then to the angel as seen by Deborah. The prophetess reports that the angel of the Lord had pronounced a curse against those who had refused to comply with the covenantal demand to supply troops for the holy war of the Lord. So that's interesting. It indicates then Deborah, as a prophetess, had that kind of experience that we said was prerequisite for the prophets to be introduced into the divine council to see what was going on up there, what decrees and judgments were being reached. And so she has had a vision of that heavenly council, but our immediate point is that the one she sees there is the angel of the Lord, and that he is then engaged in pronouncing a curse, the end of a lawsuit process against the Israelites who haven't been very forward in volunteering their military service in conducting the holy war. But now the next full-scale lawsuit speech that we come upon is in Judges 6. So let's turn to that one. It will be especially verses 8 through 10. Maybe this time we could just read from Images of the Spirit and then look at the Hebrew text. In Judges 6, 8 through 10, we read, now this time we don't actually see the term Malach Yahweh. What we do see is the term Navi, which is perfectly appropriate. This is the function of a Navi to conduct the lawsuit. And so we read of a Navi who was sent to Israel with a lawsuit message that is very much like the one we just read in Judges 2, which was delivered by the angel. It asserts, this Judges 6 lawsuit, it asserts the Lord's claim on Israel's loyal service by quoting his self-identification from the treaty preamble. Now, we didn't have quite the preamble in Judges 2. We had the historical prologue, I brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Here we also have the self-identification, the I am section. I am the Lord your God. And then by recalling his action on Israel's behalf in the Exodus and Conquest, verses 8 and 9, the claim not only of who he was, but what he's done for them. And then by way of indictment, as we'll see, Israel is reminded of the command not to submit to the gods of the Amorites, and they are denounced for their violations. And the implicit sentence, reconstructed from the introductory explanation of the occasion of the prophet's mission, the implicit sentence is that the Lord will continue to afflict Israel. They were complaining that they were being afflicted. And the sentence, therefore, is a continuation of their affliction by the hand of the Israelites, Midianites, if they persist in their idolatrous obedience. And I conclude there. Now, to suggest that this person called a Navi in verse 8 is the Malach Yahweh, that's our contention, may seem too bold, and yet that identification is possibly correct. And I think I was too modest in making claims here. Let's eliminate the word possibly from there. And I think definitely this Navi is to be identified with the Malach Yahweh. Neither the statement that the Lord sent the prophet, nor the prophet's own use of the messenger formula, thus says the Lord, disallows that interpretation. That's all consistent with this figure who is divine and yet who is sent. And sort of the proof pudding that this Navi is to be identified as the Malach comes out in the immediate sequel. In the immediately following verse, Judges 6:11, as the narrative of God's response to Israel's cry continues, there is an explicit reference to the angel of the Lord. So here's a Navi, he delivers the message, and then the Malach Yahweh did thus and so. And so I think is evident that the Malach Yahweh is the one who was there, and having accomplished the lawsuit mission, it then proceeds to tell us how he went on his way, now on a mission to Gideon to summon him to deliver Israel from the Midianites. And so let's now look at the passage and see these features there, beginning with verse 7, Judges 6, verse 7. So it begins with Vayahi. Now it came to pass, and then the verb za'ak, to cry out, subject B'nai Israel. So it came to pass then when the Israelites cried out unto the Lord. Now al odot, literally upon the causes of, because of the Midianites. The Midianites are oppressing them, they cry out for help to the Lord. When that happened, verse 8 says, the Lord then, Vayishlach, sent an Ish Navi, a prophet man, a prophet person. He sent this Navi unto the Israelites, and he said to them, that is the Navi figure said to them, Ko Amir Yahweh. So there's the messenger formula. He is sent with the message. He quotes the source of his message. Thus says Yahweh, Elohei Yisrael. And in a way, that identification is your, as we said, it's your preamble, it's your I am section, it's your title in the treaty form, which is being echoed here. And then comes the historical prologue again, the claim of not only who God was, but what he'd done for them, and again, very much in terms of the Exodus redemption and what followed thereon. So now you get the, again, that verb Allah that we saw earlier, and Hifil, I brought you up from Egypt. And even more fully in terms of the Exodus 20 preamble, goes on with the Hifil from Yatzah, Otzi, and I brought you up forth from the Beit Avadim, from the house of bondage. And beyond the Exodus, verse 9 goes on, the verb natsal, to snatch away, or also positively to rescue, to deliver, and that's what it means here. And I delivered you, miyad Mitzrayim, from the hand of the Egyptians, and from the hand of all of Lahat Sekem, of all of those, Lahats to oppress, of all of those who oppressed you. And describing the conquest which God had led, and I drove them out from before you, and I gave to you their land. So conquest, possession of Canaan, all acts of God was sent to this angel who is speaking before them with the glory spirit to accomplish this. And verse 10, And I said to you, I am Yahweh your God. And now comes the stipulations section. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites, which you are dwelling in whose land you are dwelling. That was my requirement. And then the indictment, very briefly, once again, in terms of you did not hearken unto my voice. So the repetition of the Judges 2 speech is not just in general outline, but in specific terminology. It's clearly the same speech maker, and then the same speech. And here he's called a Navi, and we should know that it is the Malach Navi. And as I said, you look on now to the following verse 11. Having made this speech, then it goes on and says, and then the Malach Yahweh came and he sat under the tree there, and so on. So here is a second passage, and I think definitely to be identified as a lawsuit speech delivered by the angel, and the prophetic character of the function is brought out even more explicitly here in the fact that the title Navi is given to the angel as he conducts this lawsuit for him. Then finally, in Judges 10, and we'll be looking at verses 11 through 14. So the first speech mentioned the Malach Yahweh by name. The second speech called him a Navi, and yet it clearly was the Malach Yahweh. In this third speech, it's another phenomenon, and it involves our recognizing that the term Malach Yahweh, angel of the Lord, could be and often was abbreviated just to Yahweh. So there will be passages where it is definitely speaking about the angel of the Lord, saying, think of Zechariah 3 would be one such passage, but there are lots of others. We'll be speaking about something that the angel of the Lord is doing or saying, and then suddenly it says God did this. And Yahweh then being used as a condensed, abbreviated, shortened form for Malach Yahweh. And I take it that that's what we are dealing with here in Judges 10. So what was it, verse 11, please? Judges 10, verse 11. You see, it says, Wayomer Yahweh. He's making the speech here. And the point I was just making, however, is that Yahweh here is condensed from Malach Yahweh. And so the Lord, in the form of his angel, said unto the Bnei Israel, is it not that from Egypt, the Egyptians, and from the Amorites, and from the Ammonites, and from the Philistines, self-pasuk, end of sentence, period, something missing, obviously, some such verb as I delivered you, huh? So is it not the case that from all of these people you have to throw in a verb, I delivered you, and that would fit in with the claims he has been making in the other speeches. And then he goes on to expand upon that in verse 12. Also the Sidonians and the Amalekites and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out unto me, Tza'ak, and now the verb Yasha, Oshia, and I saved you. Here are his claims, the Lord speaking. This is what he has done for them. I saved you, miyadam, from their hand. And then comes quickly the sin of the Israelites, the indictment. God was merciful to them. He delivered them. Wi'atem, once again, the pronoun up front for emphasis and the contrast here. This is what I did, and as for you, your response, incredible. You abandoned me. After I did all of this for you, Atzav, you abandoned me, and you went and you served other gods. Nakein, verily, or therefore, verily, then literally, lo osi, the Hoshea at Kem, literally, not will I add to save you. So here again is that verb yasaf, meaning to add. It's not asaf with the aleph meaning to gather, but it's yasaf with the yod meaning to add, to do something again. and used sort of as an auxiliary verb with the other one, and with the sense of to do something again or further. So what God is saying, yes, I saved you in the past, you've abandoned me, and so as far as the future is concerned, I won't save you anymore. So, not will I add to save you. And then sort of sarcastically telling them, you've preferred other gods, you can have them, or go to them. So verse 14, go, cry unto the gods whom you have chosen, who have chosen them. You preferred to serve them, then let them now serve you, don't come to me for help. And that's what he goes on to say, Wahema, let them, emphatically, let them, the ones you have preferred to me, let them save you in your time of trouble. And just maybe quickly to read this, it's time for us to stop. And now the Israelites said unto the Lord, we have sinned. Here again, there's an appropriate response. They've been condemned by the lawsuit. They acknowledge their guilt and so on. And they said unto the Lord, we have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good in your eyes. Only, of course, this time, some other time do what's good to us in your eyes. But this time, still they want his help. Only save us, the Hifil, from not south. Deliver us, Hayom Hazeh, today, still save us. And of course, the Lord, full of compassion, such perversity passes belief, and yet when there's any intimation of repentance, he's ready to move ahead on that, and that is what he did. Let's see. And so they proceeded, verse 6, to put aside the foreign gods from their midst, and they served the Lord. And the result was that he was prevailed upon. It's a sort of a strong expression, that the importunity of their prayer touched his soul, and he let his soul be prevailed upon by their cry for mercy, and he was prevailed upon by the amal, the troubles of Israel. And so we'll have to return to that briefly, but there is another lawsuit, and as I said, the identification of it as a speech delivered by the angel of the Lord is readily understood when you see that the angel of the Lord is often abbreviated as just the Yahweh. And in fact, in this immediate context, we have other illustrations of that.